Good evening, Rotarians and guests. My name is Dasun Premadasa, and I'll be your MC for this evening. We have a very special meeting today, but before we start, we would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present, and future, and extend that respect to all Indigenous Australians present today. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 41st meeting of the Rotary year. We're pleased to have such a great numbers in person. It's my honor to welcome tonight's guest speaker, Garry Fowler, the co-chair of the Rcma Environmental Sustainability Committee. Garry will be fully introduced by Chair of the Day, Marge Lesser. In the meantime, and please join me making them both welcome. Also today here we have Phoebe Gardner and Alexander Arnold. At last week's World Environmental Day lunch, we announced their company, Bardi. I'm not sure whether I pronounced it correctly, as the 2022 winner of the Environmental Sustainability Award. And President Reg will be presenting that award shortly. Also, we want to welcome visiting Rotarians, Rotarian Anil Changarot from the Rotary Club of Pandan Valley in Singapore. It says that Anil just visited the pre-convention in Houston on a peace building and a climate change conflict last week. So welcome, Anil. Also, there are a couple of visiting Rotarians joining us online. Rotarian Karen Lobley from Rotary Club of Sydney. Welcome, Karen, and it's lovely to have you guys here today. Just want to remind you, as our second hybrid meeting, today's meeting, for the duration of the meeting, your Zoom will be muted. And if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. So as you can see in the slide, the evening meetings are scheduled by a team of young Rotarians. And we held our meetings every second Wednesday on a hybrid format. So we welcome suggestions of suitable guest speakers for the program, and we are always love to have new and vibrant speakers so we can make this evening meeting a special one. Without further ado, I would like to invite President Reg to this podium to award the special award presentation.
The Rotary Club of Melbourne Environmental Sustainability Award recognises the distinguished service on this occasion of Phoebe Gardner and Alexander Arnold towards Rotary International's 7th area of focus, which is supporting the environment. Through this award, Rotary Melbourne recognises and applauds their willingness to put service above self with their important research work and establishment of a production facility that creates a circular food system and that has the result of reducing food waste. Phoebe and Alexander co-founded Bardi just in 2019. I bet you didn't expect to have a pandemic to navigate. You're here nonetheless, Phoebe. Their primary objective was in creating Bardi is to shape the global food system by transforming food waste into sustainable food ingredients. And they do this by growing and harvesting black soldier flies. The fly larvae consumes food waste and converts it into an all-natural protein and oil for pet food, poultry feed, and nutrient-rich organic fertilizers, thus redirecting and repurposing food waste. Phoebe and Alexander were unable to join us last week. I think there was a minor crisis in your production facility, So they missed Professor Thwaites presenting last week. But I'd like to invite Phoebe to come forward now. Unfortunately, Alexander's an apology. Phoebe, you could come forward to receive the award and respond.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're absolutely thrilled to receive the award. Thank you so much. And really pleased to be here tonight, in particular, to be able to share a little bit more about what we do at Barty and what we aspire to do in the future as well. I have a short presentation that I'd really love to jump into. Great, is everyone able to see that one? Oh, fantastic. So as Reg kindly explained, at Barty we're on a mission to reshape the global food system, and to do that, we're transforming food waste into protein and fertilizer with insects. For us, it's about solving the waste that's already going to landfills. So today we have food wastage, up to 70% of food is ending up. Just here. 70% of food wastage occurs before we see food on our plate. So that's at the farm or in commercial food manufacturing or even at a restaurant. And so at Barty, what we're doing is we're capturing that food waste before it lands in landfill, taking the contamination out of it and producing ideal feeds for this particular tropical fly to grow them and recycle those nutrients back into valuable ingredients into the food system. And one of the key things about removing food waste from landfills is the way that it actually breaks down when food does end up in landfill. Because it gets compacted, it produces methane, which is up to 30 times more potent than a gas like CO2 in terms of its impact on, in terms of its potency as a greenhouse gas and its impact on climate change. So we can remove that and get those nutrients back from that food to go back into the food system. And it's a really simple concept. And in some ways, we use a lot of interesting tech at Barty, but the concept is quite simple. We go from food waste to producing more food through our fertilizer, but also through the protein that goes into animal feed and pet food with this special fly, the black soldier fly. Our current facility, so we started right at the end of 2019, as Reg mentioned, and we started at the University of Melbourne. We built, Alex and I by hand, with a bit of help from our family and friends on the weekend, we built a 60 square metre small lab where we were able to process 2 tons of food waste that was tipped in the staff university car park on a Friday, and it had to be cleared by the Monday morning. And we would do that by hand through a Bunnings wood chipper and then drag it in barrels to the small 60 square metre lab. For everyone here today, it would have been about 1/5 the size or so of this room that we're in. And in there, we were breeding the fly in an artificial condition, feeding it food waste with big soup ladles every day, and trying to prove the initial concept that it would be possible and produce sort of 100-gram samples of the insect protein and kilo bags of the fertilizer to take to potential customers. And after doing that, we were able to take on investment from other founders who'd started amazing companies in Australia, as well as some venture capital, to build this 2,500 square metre facility. And we did that, we made that move right after the initial COVID lockdowns. And it's taken us a bit over a year since establishing and moving into that facility to go from starting in marquee tents from Bunnings breeding the fly to actually in-house designing and building 8 automated labs that attend to each life stage of the black soldier fly that we work with, and 6 automated manufacturing lines that take the food waste all the way through to an ideal feed for the insect, dose the feed into vertical stacks, insert the small neonate stage insects. They then go into a lab. This is the 7-day growth cycle noted on the slide here. We're the first in the world to be able to get this insect to grow in such a short period of time by 2- to 3-fold. And that means that when food waste lands at our facility, 7 days later, it's a product that goes back into the food system, and that's far faster and a much higher value product than in terms of how much we can uplift it in the recycling system than, say, compost, which might take more than 20 days or up to 30 days. So it goes into that lab, then we bring it back out and we separate the insect manure from the insect biomass. The manure turns into the fertilizer. Every kilo offsets 5 kilos of CO2. And then the insect biomass itself, we take, wash, pasteurize, and turn into a meal that's nutritionally equivalent to a fish meal as an input for pet food, poultry feed, aqua feed, and a few other animal feed inputs. Part of building the facility has been about gaining certifications and learning how to be great manufacturers. Alex and I were straight out of the University of Melbourne, so it wasn't our comfort zone to build a big factory. And so we've gone through the organic certification process as well as the HACCP food safety certification process as well, and now feed safe for our animal feed customers as well. And we're constantly optimizing to go way beyond what we are now. So we process up to generally about just over 50 tonnes a week, but up to 150 tonnes a week of food waste, which is about 5 big rubbish trucks every 8 hours tipping at our site. And we're able to process all of that material, whatever comes through, within 7 days. But in the future, we hope to continue this cycle where we take a tonne of food waste, produce 2 tonnes of carbon offsets, which is now Australian carbon credit certified, and produce 250 kilos of protein and 350 kilos of organic fertilizer. And we look to do that on a much larger scale. So for us, part of that is integrating into waste logistics. We had a small van and now we have a big truck. So we're going to start picking up a lot more food waste ourselves, telling the story of Barty on the bins that you might see around the city in Melbourne initially. And so far through doing that, we've offset over 1 million kilograms of CO2. And we're only just starting to hit the maximum production capacity of the facility we're in. That's been, so our team was 4 at the beginning of last year, 14 at the end of 2021, and almost 40 today. And so we're extending our operations beyond the standard 8-hour operations in order to take on more food waste and offset more CO2. Our next step, so we have a bit of a space theme in how we name our facilities, but the tiny site at the University of Melbourne we call the spaceship. The one we're in now we call the moon base. And we've named the next one preemptively Rover. And we're looking to build a 30 times larger facility that operates 24/7 and processes 300 tonnes of food waste per day into sustainable food ingredients and fertilizer. And after that, we look to repeat that process. So can we have a facility that's turning waste back into valuable, sustainable commodities that drive the food system for cities all over the world? A little bit about the insect. It's from Florida, non-pest, non-invasive. It's been in Australia since the late 40s due to global shipping. And my co-founder Alex, he has a genetics background, so we do a lot of work on the selective breeding as well as work with CSIRO on the like DNA sequencing through GWAS. We also have a lot of tech behind us, so we use AI to sort the food waste and develop our diets. We have 8 different diets that we know deliver the same amino acid profile and the protein at the end. Our 8 labs that give a consistent growth rate in 7 days. And these consistent products, because it's got to be, in the end, the product has to be consistent so that farmers will trust us and put the fertilizer on their crops, and that the protein can run the same way in the same recipes in feed manufacturing lines across Australia. When we look at some of the breakdown, it's really evident how much more sustainable vertical farming and then vertical farming with flies can be compared to some of the water feed and land usage of other protein production. And we see a real space in the future for insect protein being at a commodities level in the global food system. These are our 2 final products here that I've spoken about, and Chelsea and our manufacturing team there. And this is what it all looks like. We actually produce a lot of brown powders really in the end. And that's the fertilizer. And we've got a really wonderful growing team that all this wouldn't be possible without. And now that we're past that very initial, is this possible, like a binary yes/no answer, can the technology exist? And we're starting to send out our product across Australia. It's so amazing to be recognised in this way by Rotary, and we're just incredibly thankful. And we hope that we're able to continue to work together in some ways, and also that you might be able to spread the word as well about what we're doing to make a more sustainable food system. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Phoebe, and we must make sure you don't forget your certificate as well. Thank you. That was truly amazing. I think, and very helpful to learn a little bit more of the story about Bardee, and we really greatly appreciate that. I'm now going to call on Mark Glaser, our chairman for this meeting, and Mark will carry the meeting forward from here. Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Well, that was fantastic, Barry. I'm really impressed, Phoebe, with what you've said. And we've got two versions of Toward Net Zero tonight. We've talked about insects and all the things you've talked about. And Gary's going to talk to us briefly in terms of carbon offsets. Garry Fowler, as most people probably know, is not only a long-term Rotarian, he's also, together with Peter Berg, the current chair of the Environment Sustainability Committee. He's been a member since 2008, and he has been both secretary for a number of years, the vice president, and chairs currently the Audit and Risk Committee. And I need to stress it's audit and risk is including things environmental. He's a member of the International Program and the Arts Committee. He's actually achieved his highest pinnacle within his own profession, in that he's a fellow of the Chartered Accountant. He's a retired audit partner from EY, and in his later years with EY, he was specialised in environmental, sustainability, governance and risk, all very relevant to us. Since retiring from EY, in addition to his Rotary activities, he's served as a number of not-for-profit boards. And tonight, he's speaking, as I've just said, on Toward Net Zero and carbon calculator. Thank you, Garry. And if we have time, we're aiming for questions and answers, but I'm not sure if we'll get there.
Well, thank you, Mark, for that introduction, and congratulations, Phoebe. It's just wonderful to see what you do. I'm very well aware of the great work that you've been doing, and we're delighted that you're the recipient of this year's award. I'm going to talk to you tonight about the calculator, the carbon calculator that we've developed in ASRAC, which is a carbon calculator that's designed to be used by any club at this stage in Australia and New Zealand to calculate their carbon emissions. A little bit about why, and then I'm going to actually walk you through the process for calculating our emissions using 2021 as an example. And as most of you know, we have actually just recently offset our 2021 emissions, as Phoebe said, with carbon social credits, and thereby achieved carbon zero. So we'll see how we go. I'll try and keep it as brief as we can, and there's lots of opportunity. There will be opportunity to ask questions either informally afterwards or in any other way. So well, technology is difficult, Joe, but if you could just move to the next slide. And the next one, I'd like to, by introduction, just talk about the fact that when we first embarked on this journey of environmental sustainability, we saw the need for the Rotary Club of Melbourne to be seen as a credible player in the field, and thereby to walk the talk. And one of the best ways of demonstrating that is by achieving carbon neutrality. So Peter Berg and I set about trying to identify how we could do that, and we landed up to be able to gate crash and ESRAG. I think you all would know of ESRAG. ESRAG is the Environment Sustainability Rotary Action Group worldwide, who actually were already embarked on a project to do that. And in fact, they'd virtually reached the stage that they were going to put the subject out to tender. And we got involved at that stage. And to cut a long story short, the tender failed dismally because it was going to cost far too much and most people weren't prepared to touch it. And so we decided to develop our own process, which needed to be a fairly simple process. And we had an international team that worked on this for a couple of years, and I was privileged to be part of that team. So why would we want to have to calculate our footprint? And first of all, we saw the need to be seen as a credible player, particularly to attract young professionals to Rotary. We wanted Rotary hadn't really been seen as being involved in the environment. It was very much involved in community welfare and that sort of thing. And so we needed to be seen. It became, and this had been recognized by Rotary and became a seventh area of focus only in June. I can never remember with the pandemic whether it was last year or the year before, because last year is a bit strange. Anyway, so we needed to be seen as a credible player to attract young professionals. We wanted to create the awareness of our members of how we impact the environment with our own meetings and so on. And thereby to identify opportunities for reducing our club's footprint. And we ultimately, to the extent that we can't offset our emissions by improving our practices, to purchase carbon social credits that support projects that reduce the emissions. So that's the process that we embarked on, and this is where we are. So our team set about developing a calculator. Initially, it was going to be international. We then found it was actually too complex to include all the different factors, the emission factors for all the different environments. So we actually decided to concentrate on Australia and New Zealand. We worked together with a respected environmental consultancy, and we needed to do this because we needed our emissions to be able to be certifiable. We didn't want to go through the process of having to pay for audits, which would be very expensive. We don't have that money, but we wanted to be able to be confident in our own self-assessment that it was certifiable. The Toitu EnviroCare, who we worked with, had actually certified the Rotary Wellington's emissions some years ago, which confidentially they did on a pro bono basis, but they weren't prepared to extend the offer any further. So in our team, we specified what we needed the calculator to do. We then pilot tested the process with a number of clubs around the world. And we came up with this simple process. Having got this calculator, we needed to have a simple process where clubs identify what their specific meetings, events, and projects are. We developed an input form which was designed to capture the information they required. And then basically the process that is carried on in ESRAG now is that clubs then submit that input process to ESRAG, which happens to be me. And we actually put the information into the calculator. So next slide, please, Joe. So what I'm going to do is to walk you through our own process for 2021. And to understand this, it's actually quite a simple process. I mean, if you actually think of what the sources of our emissions are, it's very simply travel to meetings, events and projects, our meals and drinks, our electricity at the venue, accommodation and waste. And obviously travel would include air travel to the extent that to the extent that it applied. So it's actually, and those factors are common to virtually any Rotary activity that you can think of. So those are the sources. And so I'm going to use the, do you think I can do it, Joe? Oh, okay. So basically, walking through our 2021 process, we looked at the input for our regular, just as an example, the input for our regular lunch meetings. So we worked out that on average, the attendee, 74 attendees attended each meeting. At 2021, we actually only had 8 lunch meetings during the year. We identified our meeting size, the room size, the duration. Meals is a very important factor because although we started off with only one factor, as Phoebe showed on her slide, there is an enormous variation between the emissions from beef, for example, vis-a-vis fish and poultry and vegetarian. So we needed to identify those separately. So in fact, we had worked out with Sofitel that we basically in each month had 1 beef, 1 fish and 1 chicken and 1 duck effectively. And then obviously we had various vegetarian options. So we averaged those out over the year. The average number of drinks we had, which was classified as a glass of wine, we had 30 of those. We had about 60 teas and coffees. And we then had to work on the travel input. Now, that is actually the most complex, but we actually covered we actually did it in a very simple way. And actually the best example is what I did, and some of you may be aware of this. I actually did this a couple of weeks ago to revisit our emissions. When everybody came to the meeting, I asked them 2 questions effectively. How did you get here? And, you know, whether it was by car, and if sort of car, what sort of car, if by public transport, whether it was tram, train or bus, and we've got factors for all those, and roughly how far they had traveled. And I basically summarized those, and I've used those factors to work out that in fact, for our Rotary meetings, people traveled 409 on average for a Rotary meeting, traveled 496 kilometers by car, and public transport 914 kilometers. That was in 2021. The factors for car are not that diverse, but public transport, particularly train, is an absolute fraction of what a car is. So, what I'll come to in a moment is you'll find that because our club, so many of our people actually come by public transport, that our emissions are actually quite low comparative to many other Rotary clubs. So basically what it worked out at is the emissions from our lunch meetings. The car travel was these are all kilograms of CO2 equivalent. Car travel was 925. Train, tram and bus was actually 98. So it was a 10th, although the distance traveled was twice as much. It was only a 10th of the emissions. Meals were 1,835, drinks were 87, electricity 121. So simply our total emissions from lunch meetings for that year were 3 tons effectively. And interestingly, the emissions per attendee were about 5.2, and the emissions per meal were about 3. So that's basically on average for lunch meetings last year. And you'll see some comparatives as we go on. If we move on to another example, was our Centenary Lunch. Now, basically, without going through you can see those numbers for yourself. it's interesting to actually see that the emissions per attendee for the Centenary Lunch were actually nearly 8 kilograms. And the emissions per meal were actually 5.7 kilograms. Now, if I can work out how to go backwards, if you, I want to go backwards. So if you remember, our lunch meetings emissions were 5 in total and 3.2 per meal. Now, in fact, which i.e. the Centenary Lunch was much higher, and that was predominantly because of the fact that the Sofitel served us a wonderful beef cheek meal. And that is, a beef meal is actually around about 5 times as emission intensive as a fish meal. So that was a learning we had, and you'll notice, for those of you that were at the lunch on Wednesday, you'll notice that we didn't have beef cheek. So what that amounted to was that for 2021, our total emissions were actually 7 tons. And just walking through that very quickly, the lunch meetings, which we've spoken about, were about 3 tons. The Centenary Lunch was actually 1.7. The International Women's Day breakfast was about 841. Committee meetings were 35. Now, we hardly had any committee meetings, physical committee meetings last year. And the office, which is actually the office electricity, was actually 1,336. So that is how our 7 tons of emissions for 2021 were added up, and those, as you will see later, are what we offset. Now, if we look at the food waste event last week, for those of you who were there, as another example, there we actually had 150 attendees. The travel worked out, and basically what the travel factors that I used for the Centenary Lunch were the same factors effectively per attendee as I used as the new ones I computed for the Rotary meetings. So the joy for those people that think it's going to be awfully complicated, once you've actually got factors, you can actually really carry on applying those factors for all kinds of meetings. And you'll actually, and so the emission and the meals and drinks were quite low at 347. So the total emissions per attendee were 4.54, and which is much less than for others, but the main reason being the emissions per meal. And the emissions per meal were only 2.03. Now, as for those of you that were at the lunch, Sofitel, in conjunction with Matt Preston, went to a lot of effort to develop a system to make up a sustainable meal. It was actually a 3-course meal, as people know. We had a starter and a main course and a dessert, and it still only came out at about 2 for the meal. So a very, very interesting, a very good example. So basically, what were we will continue, we will offset our emissions, and we were delighted to be able to identify. There was a lot of talk about trying to plant trees and that sort of thing, but to get a certifiable tree planting process is complex, and basically we came across what we found was to us this perfect solution, that this organization With One Seed, who has got this great community forestry program in East Timor. We've done a lot of work with East Timor. We've done a lot of work supporting the community in East Timor. This means that the money that we pay for our credits, which as a matter of interest were at $63 a ton, which for that year amounted to $441. that goes directly to the community in East Timor that is helping us support the environment. So it's a great win-win. So what you've got up there is our certification. We've actually got it's, you'll see that it's a carbon social certificate. It's actually signed by Ramos Porter and others, and it's a great pride that we've been able to do that and support East Timor once again, which is one of our core communities that we try and support. We've also agreed that we will report the emissions in our annual accounts each year, and the Audit and Risk Committee agreed to that in our meeting last week. So, so in summary, we set out on a process to learn, to help our members understand where we come from, and then to basically offset where we can, at least to reduce where we can, but then to offset by purchasing carbon credits. And I'm delighted to say we can now claim, and I believe we are the first Rotary Club in Australia, not in Australasia, because the Rotary Club of Wellington got there before us, but in Australia to actually be certified carbon zero. So thanks very much. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Well done, Garry. Well done. We might do a few Q&As, but just quickly, I think on behalf of Rotary, amazing delivery. I was very fortunate to join some of the committee and see Garry's fine work in terms of delivering initiatives. So well done in getting this up and running. Yeah, Garry. Just quickly, for those who went last week to World Environment Day, we spoke a lot about waste. Yes, waste is bad for business, which we found out quite simply. But for our club, it's amazing to see that we're setting an action out and we're actually showing and putting a step forward in terms of using that data to allow us to make decisions. Garry, the first question to you is, what other ways can we use the calculator and the footprint score to reduce our risk and also use that data in different ways to make effective decisions in the club?
Well, basically, as far as making effective decisions, it should actually be built into every project proposal. And I think, Rich, am I right in saying that it is? It was certainly spoken about fairly early on that basically it's one of the risks that projects that in setting forward a proposal, this should be identified as something, and in fact, and any opportunities for reducing risk and reducing emissions should be built into our proposals. I think is probably the main thing. And obviously looking at our own internal practices, we have looked at our own internal practices. We have looked at Joe's practices in the office, and we'll continue to monitor those.
Great.
Yeah.
Amazing, Garry. Do we have any further questions in the room about any of the stats or any use of the calculator?
What next, Garry? What next?
Well, as far as the calculator is concerned, there is a lot of interest. So at the moment, we're actually, ESRAG has had a number of, in Oceania has had a number of meetings to sell this to Rotary clubs. We would, the vision is that we would like every Rotary club in Australia to basically become net zero. That was the vision that Wellington actually had. They actually got the process going initially. And so it's a matter of doing that and actually trying to make people realize that it's actually not that difficult to do. There are a lot of people find it very daunting, but in fact, I'll tell you how daunting it is to get pretty close. Before we actually started this process, it was my idea to actually use a spreadsheet to do it, and I actually got hold of Reg as the company secretary, and I got him to estimate for us. And I said, on average, how many kilometers do people travel to meetings? And I think he said 15. And what percentage of people come by car and what by public transport? and things like that. And by just having a conversation with him, I produced some I produced some trial numbers to see what our footprint looked like, and they were not that far out. And we actually did a similar process. I actually worked out the emissions for the District 9810 had a conference, and I worked out there, together with Pat Armstrong, we estimated what their emissions were going to be, and we went through a whole process to illustrate it. And we found out that and when I spoke at the conference, I actually used those estimates to show what I thought the footprint was. We got the actual numbers and they weren't far out either. So it can be done. I think the Greens have come up with a slogan again that we shouldn't let the perfect get in the way of the good. And I think that is a good thing to be thinking about in this area as well.
Garry, I think we've got one more question for Karen online. If you could just come off mute and ask a question. Okay.
Oh, sorry, that's me. I'm calling in from Sydney. I was just asking about whether you took into account the use
Well, I
of
can answer the uptake of EVs in the club. The only one that I know of is mine, and Ian. So, and Ken Woolard. Well, that's fine. The other surprising thing is that EVs are not as fuel efficient as you think, because the electricity, if you get the electricity off the grid, it's dirty electricity. So, unless you buy green power, that's quite correct, or your own solar. I actually, basically 2/3 of my electricity in my car comes from my solar. But in fact, in New Zealand, who are basically very efficient with their renewable energy, their factor is for electricity is very low. Ours is actually very high, and so as we get more efficient in the country in our emissions in producing our energy, so our electricity vehicles will become more efficient. But we would encourage. But as I say, that is not nearly as efficient. Well, it's even more efficient to come by public transport or to walk, which a lot of our members do, or alternatively, at least to carpool. Yeah.
Thank you, Garry. I think that now concludes Q&A, and hand it back to Dustin for a bit of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Garry. That's such a timely presentation. With that, we come to the closing of the 44th evening meeting, and I would like to remind you that the evening monthly meeting is held every second Wednesday of the month, and the next meeting will be held on the 13th of July. And on behalf of the evening organizing committee, we would love to have you all in person. It's such a great atmosphere when you actually see a lot of numbers coming in into the venue, so we can have a great meeting. So we'd love to see you in person next month as well. I want to thank our chair of the day, Marge Lesser. Thank you, Marge, and also the evening meeting, Yidan, George, Stefan, and Sana. For all the hard work, especially Yidan has been running around doing a lot of hard stuff. So thank you, Yidan. So the next week, please note the next week's Rotary lunch meeting will be in-person only meeting. So that's a bit different to our regular meetings, which we normally do in hybrid. Excuse me. But it's actually going to be a great one. We have guest speaker, Dr. Kathy Foley. She'll be talking about harnessing the power of science and technology in a rapidly changing world. So that sounds very interesting. So please look forward to the newsletter and homepage for details. As always, you can book yourself in through Humanitics prior to the meeting. and love to see you all there as well. Thank you for everybody who made their way to this evening. It's lovely to have you again, everybody. And also I want to again thank Garry for a great presentation. And also I want to congratulate Phoebe and Alexander from Badi. And thank you for being here as well. So with that, good night, everybody. Have a safe journey back home, and I'll see you all next month.